Hello, everyone. So I'm back with a guest, a very special guest, probably honestly the most excited I've ever been to interview someone.
Oh, come
And I mean, you're a legend, and you're one of the people who obviously, as your time as editor in chief of Marvel Comics, really created this new direction for them. Obviously, you worked on all the MCU projects until you left to Amazon,
on.
and you're doing some other stuff now as well. So you're I've already done your introduction. Technically, people have seen your introduction already.
All right.
So,
Then I need to correct you on a few things. Number one, I didn't leave Marvel to go to Amazon. Okay.
okay.
Amazon came around afterwards when they realized I was available, and I'm not exclusive to Amazon. I have a first look deal, so I work with Amazon along with other people that I'm working with. Secondly, the new Marvel direction, the thing that happened from 2000 on, and bringing the company back from bankruptcy or Chapter 11, that did not happen in a vacuum either. I was not the only person. There were a ton of very creative, brilliantly creative people involved, and very, very smart business folks involved that helped bring us out of there. I'm happy to have been part of that team. Uh, and I appreciate giving me as much credit as you just did. But I always just kind of love, ooh, because I know how much work a lot of people put, and I happen to be in a position where I place myself sort of as a target, but also as a face of what it was we were doing, because I think Marvel operates best when there is someone who's out in front in the editorial group. And I didn't invent that stuff. That stuff came from Stan Lee, so I was just trying to follow his footsteps.
But I think you got to give yourself a lot of credit for what you did because you've seen people, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but try to replicate that, I guess, quote unquote, formula and not work out as well. So you do have the creative side of that was huge in that. Obviously, as you
Yeah,
said, you're not the only
yeah.
one, but I think you played a huge part in that, and I think
Thank
you
you.
deserve credit for that. So,
Well, thank you.
um,
I'll let you go.
so
I'll
we
let you go.
so we are so happy that we get to talk to you today. And I start off every interview with this, and it makes even more sense when someone like you is sitting on the other side, which is, well, who is your favorite superhero?
My favorite superhero was always Spider-Man, and then as I was, because I dropped as a kid, it was always Spider-Man, 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 right? And Daredevil was not quite the character that he became later on, but when I was reintroduced to comics as an adult, at least in age, maybe not mentally, Daredevil became my other favorite character because of the changes that they made to him, and what they added to sort of the canon of the character. So those are always been my two favorite Marvel characters. And the reason Daredevil didn't resonate when I was a kid was because he was kind of like Spider-Man light. He was just another version of Spider-Man. He was quippy and all this sort of stuff, and I didn't. It really sort of distracted me from seeing basically what Frank Miller saw in the character. I guess Frank is the guy who really sort of brought the character into the iconic phase of his sort of publishing history.
Right. So that's interesting. I mean, I can't disagree with either of those. Those are like two of my favorite Marvel characters. So, Daredevil, the lawyer side of that will always be
Yeah,
fun for me. And then obviously Spider-Man being the only real like child, like, younger character in that kind of core
yeah.
Avengers team will always kind of, always resonated with me personally. Now, when a lot of people talk about comics and, I'm sure you've heard all this stuff as even as you wanted to, you know, you wanted to be involved in this industry. You always hear these people saying, oh, it's a dying industry. No one reads comics anymore. What was the reason you said, this is something I want to do? This is something which I think is important to do. What was that thought process?
Well, first of all, people have been saying comics have been dying since the dawn of comics. Literally, this is not new. This is really not new. From the day I was breaking in till today, right? The biggest difference between, I've often said that I've worked in every, I can't think of an aspect of the entertainment business, a medium, that I have not worked in or dabbled in, right? And then that's thanks to, my past as a musician, but also my career at Marvel, and then my career at Marvel slash Disney. It gave me incredible opportunities to work with a lot of different creative people and different canvases. But I've never seen an industry more content or more satisfied in predicting its own demise than comic books. It's beyond me, and it's never stopped. However, the big difference today is that some people are profiting off of that, right? There are whole YouTube channels that are created around comics are dying. Look at how terrible this is. Comics are not dying. There were two times in our history where comics almost died. One was during the Frederick Wortham, the senatorial trials on child delinquency, where they cited comics as the sole cause. And then this is what created the Comics Code. And I'm not going to go into the history, but anybody wants to wiki it, it's all there, right? And it's all based on Frederick Wortham. He was a psychologist, a psychiatrist who wrote a book about how comics were literally, turning our kids into violent criminals. So there's that. And then the second time was right after the boom years where all these speculators came into comics, and that's the early to mid 90s, where comics were selling millions upon millions of copies, but did not have millions upon millions of readers. So when the speculator market crashed, it almost took the entire industry with it. That was scary. So, but in terms of why I wanted to be in this industry, it's the same reason why I stay in this industry. I mean, I've worked in cinema, I've worked in TV, I've worked in all these different areas, but I always go back to comics, and I just think I'm a storyteller at heart, whether I'm writing, whether I'm drawing, whether I'm talking to you, and to me, it's just the most satisfying and purest way for me to tell my personal stories that I want to tell, or even Marvel's stories. I just love it, And is it the place where I could make the most money? No, not really, but I don't care. I just love doing it, and this is why I left a music career to get back into comics after not reading them for a very long time, because I was just so turned on and jazzed by it, that I just keep doing it. So,
And I think I think when you talk about the history, obviously there's a lot of turbulent history with comics and regulations, and you see it kind of continue on, especially, the conversation about superheroes and how that continues to evolve. And, when you talk
yeah.
about people profiting off of the demise of comics and superheroes, that still continues and probably is amplified even today. So,
Well, like I said, in the past, it would just be fans at stores and retailers saying, "Oh my God, the end is nigh." Now people literally have whole YouTube channels like, "This is it. This is the end, right? Right?" But but they profit off of it because they've been shunned from the mainstream, or whatever it may be, whatever their reasons are, not realizing that if the industry went away with as much glee as they talk about it, if it went away, they'd be out of a job too, because they wouldn't have a YouTube channel to bitch about, right? So but you just roll with it. It's part of the industry, and the thing is that you know comics are a business, and what happens in business, I don't care if you're selling soda pop, if you're a restaurant, doesn't matter. If you're working in construction, you have ebbs and flows. You have years where, oh my God, we can't keep up with all the work. And you have other years that are slowdowns, right? Maybe the economy affects it. Maybe demand just dries up. But if we're running our business correctly, which from everything that I've seen, from retailers to the publishers, even though fans may not think this, running the business correctly, we're protected against that. And there will be, unless there's some crazy crash coming that no one can anticipate, comics are healthy, right? Some years are healthier than others, but it doesn't mean we're going out of business as an industry. So I really just hope that a lot of fans keep that in mind. Maybe it's fun to speculate. I'm a sports fan, right? So I'll sometimes get furious at one of my players for I love baseball. One of my players for he's gone over 20. This guy stinks. Send him back to the minors. But that's the immediate reaction. The other reaction is baseball's hard. It's really hard, and professionals go into slumps, and these people earn their positions on the team, and they know what they're doing. They're just going through a
Right.
patch, you know. So
So when you talk about fit, I guess you talk about the ebbs and flows and all this stuff. What do you think about the idea then of superhero fatigue, right? Because that's another topic which kind of comes up, I'm
yeah,
sure, on a daily basis. And there's again people who make their living off talking about how superheroes have gone woke and people are fatigued of them or whatever they want to say about them, right? All this other nonsense.
yeah.
What do you kind of think through your like as your own professional opinion, I guess, on this idea of superhero fatigue and all of this other kind of stuff around that?
You know, I think there is fatigue of any genre if it's not being done well. Okay, so you know, I remember during a few of the sort of years where things weren't going great, the the thing that I always used to hear, including when I became editor in chief at Marvel, right, which some saw as the sitting in the best seat on the Titanic. Um, the thing I would always hear is, yeah, kids don't want to read comics anymore. It's all video games and video games that they replace. Nobody wants comics. Who wants to sit and read? And you know, both myself and Bill Jemis, who was the CEO of Marvel at the time, we had the same philosophy. People will want to read comics if we put out really great comics, right? And will certain genres, will people lose interest for some point? Yeah, maybe. But the truth of the matter is, whenever I hear someone say, well, nobody's buying our product because of video games, it's like, oh my God, to me, that's the equivalent of, you know, rock and roll or comics are turning kids into Satan worship. And stop, just stop. That's not reality. That's not reality. It's your reality because maybe you're not putting out good product. So we worked really hard on our product. And we were and again in 2000 we brought in the best writers possible, because to me it's all about story and it starts with the writers. Um, and we put out great product, and we were not surprised that by putting out great product, our readership increased. What was a real pleasant surprise was that readers came back. Right, we had no idea. We were sitting there saying, it could be a lost generation of readers, like those folks that dropped out because they got disgusted with the speculator thing and the stories weren't great. They may never come back. They did. That was a real surprise. I can't tell you how many people would come up to me at conventions and say, I dropped comics for years, and then when you guys started, I just picked it up again. So that was really pleasant. And the readers are out there. You just have to have a compelling product. And that goes for any business, right? Any business, once it slumps, if it really starts slumping, you'll see a company say, well, people aren't buying our stuff because of X, Y, and Z. Okay. But maybe you just need to put out a better product. That's, and that goes for me as well. I mean, if my stuff, the stuff that I do in the future does not sell, I don't want to put that on the readers or the customer. That's on me. If I didn't market it well, if I didn't write a good story, draw a good story, that's totally on me. So there's a lot of deflection that goes on. I even see it within the creative community. Hey, I'm not hired because of X, Y, and Z. It's like, maybe you're not hired for other reasons. Even if you're really talented, don't know. But yeah, so I buy into that there is some fatigue, or there could be some fatigue if you're not providing compelling content.
So when you also started, you were also one of the, as I said in the introduction, and you were kind of one of the founding like brain people in the on the creative side of the MCU, right? You were there at the very beginning. You were there, as it kind of formed into what is now the most recognizable franchise,
Yeah,
like film universe franchise ever, and most profitable ever. Um, and you worked a lot with Kevin Feige as well, who is still there and is still running the show there, based on what we know. And what is it about what you guys did, which in with Iron Man 1, which made this universe able to not only sustain itself, but thrive in a world where you see DC start 3 cinematic universes, you see, Sony try a few things, you see Fox obviously try to do their thing and fail. Like, how did you guys manage to do something which is not, I guess, quote unquote, mainstream, and make it mainstream?
I think it's a very simple formula, right? And it's the same one. When I took over as editor in chief, I always said, I didn't invent any of this stuff. I didn't create Spider-Man. I didn't create all our iconic characters. We are at Marvel, we are creative trust fund babies. We have been handed these, this bank vault filled with gold bars, and it's ours to either sit on and just let it sort of get stale and moldy, or try to reinvest it into something great and build upon it, or we could end up losing it all, right? So we start there. But then, I always used to refer to the metaphorical map that was left in my desk by Stan Lee and all our predecessors, right? And that map really had a very clear path as to what made Marvel successful in the beginning, how they became the small company that then eventually became the biggest publisher, but had yet to really sort of conquer Hollywood. So we started on the publishing end and revisiting that and realizing it was about characters. I mean, I have a newsletter, a Substack newsletter called Joe Quesada's Drawing the Line Somewhere. So I tell a story about Stan Lee giving me the formula to how to create the perfect Marvel superhero character. And there is a formula. So if
So
you
the
want to
Marvel
read that,
formula is real. The Marvel formula is real.
there's a formula. It's a formula. And, when you hear it, you go, duh, right? So if you want to see that formula, like I said, go to Substack, search my name, or search Drawing the Line Somewhere. It might be, I think I have like 8 or 9 newsletters out currently. So it's a relatively new newsletter. And there's one there specifically about Stan and the phone call that we had where I had seen the Matrix. Stan showed me the Matrix of how to create moral characters. So, we start from that point, right? That it's already baked in the DNA. I often also talk about Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney prior to Bob Iger. And Eisner realized that Disney was built originally, because Disney was in big trouble when it took over. Disney was built on this foundation of animation, and they had strayed from that. So his focus was back to animation, and that's what gave us The Lion King and everything that started coming out after that, right? And then Disney came back. It's the same thing with us, right? There's a certain DNA that's built into Marvel. I'm getting around to the movies. Don't worry, I'm coming there. There's a certain DNA that's built into our characters, into our universe. That was what Marvel Studios did incredibly well. They were able to take that. They weren't afraid or ashamed of the source material, because, as with the exception of the Superman movie and maybe a handful here and there, I guess the Batman movie at that time too, the directors and the writers, looked at the source material and said, "This stuff's good. Let's do that," right? But for the most part, the majority of comic book properties that were adapted for the screen, a studio would come in and license a property and look at it and, realize, well, this thing's been iconic for, I don't know, 40, 50 years. Let's change it around. Not realizing, well, why do you think it's been iconic? Why do you think it's lasted the test of time? And then you sit there and you watch this movie and it's completely unrecognizable, right? Whereas the Marvel movies, the brilliance of it is that they took the DNA of the characters, the construct of the characters, and yes, they updated a few things, but the Tony Stark that you got in that first Iron Man movie is not unrecognizable from the Tony Stark in the comics. And even though Robert Downey Jr. put his special spin on it, again, you take it as interpretation, right? It's an interpretation of something as opposed to being a reinvention of something and completely that then you're like, I don't know where this came from, right? And the suit was cool. It didn't look exactly like the comics, but it looked like something that could be built in this universe. And I think the other brilliant thing that the Kevin and Marvel Studios did was, instead of just basing a movie on a particular run, we all realize we have, 50, 60 years of history on all these characters. So, which gives us 50 or 60 years of stories to cherry pick. And I don't see this in a negative way. I'm saying, like, cherry pick little elements of each one. And you've seen this happen, right? And then make that into a movie. So that as a fan, if you've been reading this stuff for years, you're like, oh, I remember that. I remember that. I remember that. But if you're not a fan, you're still being exposed to the Marvel DNA. So if you graduate from that to that the movie to saying, I want to go read those comics, or I want to see the animation, it all feels of a whole, even though they're different. You don't feel like you're not in the Marvel universe. And that's what was key, was respecting the source material, understanding that this stuff's been around forever for a reason. So let's lean into that. Stan, Jack, Steve, John, Marie, they all left a map of how to do it. Just follow it.
So especially for the movie side of things, I think at least my view has always been the comedy makes the movies what they are. And what I mean by that is people love sitcoms. People love those kind of things where they can just kind of enjoy it, laugh, and it doesn't always have to be so, I guess, this is gonna sound very cheesy when I say, but it doesn't have to be so serious, right? Like you can have a little bit of fun with your movie. And I think that at least in my view has always been like the reason people love sitcoms, The Office, The Friends, all this other stuff is because of that element. And I think Marvel does that better than anybody. And I think that's why they've been able to, make movies which people can just go enjoy and watch without having to think about it on such deep levels. They can, but they
Yeah.
don't have to, right? Like, what do you think? Was that kind of your
Yeah,
intention?
it definitely has to be. I mean, the Marvel has always had through. There's two things I think that really separated Marvel Comics, right? Well, more than two things, but they were always there was always an element of humor in them, right? Of where the heroes were very human and sometimes self-effacing, which is great. But there was also a little subversive thing to it, right? Because I remember when I was reading them as a kid, I was 8 and 9, and my 16-year-old cousin was reading them too, right? Which of course made me feel like I was reading stuff that I wasn't supposed to read, which made them really, really cool. But it's the human element, and the other thing is that Marvel's characters can be adapted into different genres, right? So Winter Soldier was clearly a different genre than Iron Man, right? And Daredevil, which was really, really serious, still played as a TV show because it was sort of the noir side, the street level side of our universe. So I think we could play in all those worlds, as long as, again, we're like if you did Daredevil as in the same vein as Spider-Man and jokey and stuff, I don't think it works as well. I really don't. I think Mac Murdock is as serious as a heart attack sometimes. And when you see him laugh, then you're like, oh, okay. It stands out as like a unique moment. But I think the humor was huge, because you're trying to produce these 4 quadrant movies that everybody wants to come and see. And I think that was the thing, was doing movies that everybody wanted to see, that became must watch events.
That's interesting. And I think you guys did that. And I think, you saw obviously the success of that as the MCU went on. Now, you have a first look deal with Amazon, like you mentioned. So first of all, I guess for the audience, what is a first look deal? And
Right.
what kind of things are you hoping, I guess, to adapt based on that with that deal for Amazon?
Well, without getting into the full details, first look deal is basically that, I am, stuff that I create, they get to look at it first and decide whether it's something that Amazon is interested in or not. But I'm also, they also want to see me bring stuff that I think, whether I create it or not, stuff that I think might be right for their platform, what their programming mission statement is, things that maybe they didn't think about, which is something I've also been doing with them, and that's been a lot of fun too. So it's not just all about my stuff. It's basically just operating as a producer, coming in and saying, have you guys seen this? Have you guys thought of this? This is how I think this could be successful and adapted in certain ways. So that's really fun. Sometimes bringing them stuff and like, we had no idea this existed. I'm like, yeah, it's one of my favorites. So can't tell you what those are, but that's essentially what we've been working on. But of course, right now with SAG and the Writers Guilds striking, there's not a lot of anything happening right now. So everybody's kind of sitting around saying, okay, let's see what happens and when it happens. But I have been enjoying working with them a lot.
So now I do have to ask because obviously, like you just mentioned the strikes. It's obviously the topic everyone's talking about. You've worked, obviously, you wrote comics, you've worked in the film industry, you worked in the TV industry. What is your view on the use of AI now, and all the stuff kind of going on with these contract negotiations? I know you've probably been following them to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been following them. Again, I don't live in the world of immediate panic. Like AI is a thing, right? It's definitely a thing, but I think currently, and maybe people are playing the futurist role and saying, but there will come a time. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, right? But I also remember when Bitcoin and NFTs were like, you must do these things, or you're gonna be financially left behind. And I'm just, I'm gonna sit back and wait because some of this stuff doesn't feel right to me. But in terms of the AI thing, I think what the reason I'm not as panicked as some others. Now there are certain professions that, well, look, there are AI voices that could, you could, there's Morgan Freeman's voice, there's Obama's voice, but those are rife with issues because you have to license Morgan Freeman's voice. So Morgan Freeman should be getting a piece of that. That's very obvious to me. Um, in terms of artwork, I think what I've seen so far maybe gets better, but what I've seen so far is some of it's pretty, but it's all photographically stiff. Again, nothing where I'm like, God, they're going to replace this. And in some cases, maybe they, for some other companies, they might. But I think, Neil Adams once said to me that, and I find this to be very, very true, that an artist's style comes from his inability to draw certain things, right? So, because if we knew how to draw everything perfectly, we'd just be drawing photos. So I wonder, when AI gets to that point where it's just drawing everything perfectly, will anybody care? Because there'll be no style to it, right? Unless it's going to be saying, well, I'm going to adapt this style and this style, and I just don't. I don't know how to get there, and I think that by the time they get there, there will be some sort of legal ramifications to some of this stuff. But the other thing I find interesting is that who was the first one out of the box recently this year? Was it ChatGPT that was the first one that really
Yeah.
sort of said we've got something, right? So I found it interesting that, all right, so maybe ChatGPT has something. Then out of the blue, like every AI manufacturer had made a breakthrough. And I'm sitting back going, doesn't feel right. I think every AI manufacturer realizes that they have to announce something to keep up with the announcements that are happening. So I have a feeling that there might be some premature stuff out there, And I've used some AI stuff, not for artwork, but I've used it to grammar correct so much, and it ain't perfect. It's pretty off, and it has no personality to it. But it's a long-winded answer to say that at this moment, I'm not hysterically, you know, saying, "Oh my God, this is an issue." Again, for actors whose faces can be replaced, who that can be, put upon somebody else's body, that's a real concern. But that's also, I would assume at some point, that's not legal. You can't do that. You can't just take somebody's image and use it without them giving you permission and getting paid for it. Same thing with voices and things like that. So there are places where it's concerned, but I think those are pretty. I'm hoping that those are obviously resolved in some
Right.
time, right? Um, you know, whoever owns Elvis's image, right? I don't know if his estate does or someone has purchased it from his estate. Someone uses Elvis in a movie, they need to get paid. Whoever
Right.
owns the image. So,
I'm paid
and I'm,
fairly too, because they
huh?
can say, "Oh yeah, we're paying you 12 cents to do
They,
it,"
they
but
get paid what they negotiate, right? What
right.
they negotiate with, right? Now they're and I wonder because there are other issues like I know that the background players have a problem, right? Where and again I don't know, not being in the thick of these negotiations, there is an issue for background players who could find that their images are being used in backgrounds several times, and I think the complaint was that they only get paid once, right?
Yeah.
For that. But then I think back and I'm like, geez, I mean, at the end of the day, the studios could probably just create generic people in the background anyway, and nobody gets paid. So I don't know. I don't know enough about that part to tell
Right.
you, what's right, what's wrong. So I can't even comment on it. But I'm a supporter of unions. My father and my grandfather were both in the construction union, and it was beneficial to our family, to my education, to all that stuff. So I hope that a fair agreement is resolved for everybody, and everybody can just get to work, because this really sucks. It just sucks not just for the strikers, but also for the economy of LA. And I think it's going to be a very different town when this is all over with.
Yeah, and obviously the other thing I want to throw in, I know we're getting toward the end of our time, but obviously the Marvel VFX workers just voted, I think 2 days ago, to unionize.
Just read that. Yeah, I just read that this morning. Yeah, I was late to it.
So I mean, I've been told by people in the VFX industry that this is something that they've been advocating for, and wider VFX unions. I don't know if you have any opinions on that based on your time with Marvel, but
No, actually, I don't, because I don't know enough about it, to be honest with you. I really don't. In my years working with Marvel Studios, the only artistic department outside of the writing end of it, the script and directing end of it, the only part of the studio that I collaborated with was some of the concept designers, but that's only because they did some work for us on the Marvel TV end, right? So
right.
I never talked to or dealt with any of the VFX people. So I honestly have no insight into what's going on over there. But let's wait and see. Again, I just, with all this stuff, I always adapt a wait and see attitude, and I don't feel it's proper for me to go out there screaming on the internet until I know all the facts on my. Not that I scream on the internet anyway, right? But it's just um, there's enough knee jerk reactions out there and opinions
Yeah.
that nobody needs mine. Yeah.
Well, with that being said, I know we're at the end of the half hour, so I'd like to thank you for taking the time
Thank
to
you too,
talk to me
man.
today.
I
Uh,
appreciate the questions, and also, we got to plug my appearance at Fan Expo
we
Canada.
will, yes. You're going to be
Which
at
is
Fan Expo. You're going to be there.
I'm going
What
to
days are
be.
you going to be there?
It's one of my absolute favorite conventions. I mean, this will be my third. I think the last time I was at Fan Expo was when Marvel was being acquired by Disney, and I was getting phone calls at the convention saying that the deal can't move forward unless you sign these contracts, because I was an executive of the company, and I'm like, all right, just send me. It was crazy. I was getting stuff back to the hotel, and I had to walk away from my signings and stuff to do this because it was like so imperative at the time. Uh, but it was fun. It's always a fun convention. It's and I love Toronto, and Canadians are all right. I like the Canadians. They're good people.
Yeah. I think we're all great people, all
Are
Canadians are
you
great people.
Canadian?
But yeah, I'm Canadian. I live
Where are
in
you
Toronto,
from?
actually.
Oh,
Toronto.
cool.
Yeah.
You come
Yeah.
to the show?
I'm actually not in town for that. There'll be other people
Oh,
covering it for us,
yeah.
but yeah. But everyone, so are you there all weekend or all
I am
Thursday to?
there, yeah, the entire time. So I will have my booth will be there. So just look for, my graphic somewhere in the middle of everything. I don't know exactly where we're going on the convention floor, but I shouldn't be, well, I don't know, it's a big con. I might be difficult to find, but I'm there. So cool.
We'll definitely put all the info for Fan Expo and
Cool.
your Substack as well in the
Thanks, man.
description, in the podcast description, all that stuff. So you can
Yeah.
check out that stuff too. Do you have anything else you want to promote? Anything before we?
At the moment, no, I'm just, I'm working on stuff that I can't really talk about yet because I'm not ready to announce. The Substack is probably the best place to get updates on me. Although, I'm on Twitter, Joe Quesada on Twitter, Joe Quesada on Facebook, Joe Quesada on Instagram, and I'm on Threads now as well. And I have a Tumblr, but I haven't touched Tumblr in years, sitting there. But Substack is really, really where I'm putting my focus. I really love the community, and like the people that subscribe. First of all, it's free. And the fans that are there because they want to be there and they're engaged in what I do. And, they're reading the stuff and commenting. And it reminds me of back in the day when I started my company, Event Comics, and we had a message board and we created this sort of community of fans that were just having a blast, just shooting the what.
Yeah.
So I'm having a fun time there, but that's probably where I'll make just about every announcement will eventually go through there, and with the details will be on my Substack. So if you're interested in what I'm doing, what I got, come on down. There'll also be tutorials. I'm going to be doing some tutorials on probably less of like, how to draw the human face, how to draw this, because there's a lot of that stuff on YouTube already done by people who do it much better than I do. But mine will be more along the business side of comics, how to build your perfect portfolio, how to submit a pitch to a publisher, things like that, how to keep your sanity as an artist or a writer. Just, sort of a little more cerebral and a little more strategy oriented than how to draw.
Well, I think your experience speaks for itself when it comes to that side of things. So I think everyone should definitely check that out. Again, it's all linked, so everyone should be able to find it. I'll put a link your social media as well somewhere on like in the description or
Well, thank
podcast
you, Phil.
description.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And we'll definitely have to find a way to have you on again at some point
Yeah,
because I could talk to you literally for hours, but I was told 30 minutes, so I have to tailor my questions to that.
we'll definitely do it again. Definitely do it again.
But it was really great to talk to you, and thank you everyone for watching, and see you all next time.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.